So at this time, I'd like to just kind of do some practice working with volume and surface area. So the first one I want to look at is we have, first off, do you know that shape? Well, we can call it a box, or the fancy name is the rectangular prism. So again, if you're doing your homework, if you're not familiar with the formulas, you can click on View an Example, and they'll probably give you the formulas there as well if you can't memorize them. And then just make sure you make yourself a quick note somewhere on a piece of paper somewhere, those formulas, so you'll have a little bit easier access to it. Because you will not have access to those formulas when you take a test. So again, volume, remember to count the number of cubes inside of it, all we need to do is multiply the edges together. So that's the length times the width times the height. To find surface area, remember the surfaces, the top and the bottom are the same. The left face and the right face are the same, and then the front and the back are the same. So remember one of the formula was is 2 times the length times the width, plus then you got the width times the height maybe, plus then the length times the height. So if I call this the length, this is the width, and this is the height, notice that the length and the width would be determining the area of the bottom, which would also be the area of the top. The width times the height would be the right side and the left side. The length and the height would be the front and the back. So we have those faces. So really all we gotta do is substitute in these formulas. So the first one, if I substitute in, I'm going to have 6 times 4 times then 2.1. So since there's a decimal, it's not a bad idea in my problem to use parentheses for multiplication so I don't get confused there with that decimal. So but on a calculator, it really didn't matter. Just as long as you know you're going to multiply these together. So I'm just going to multiply on my calculator 6 times 4 times 2.1. And this is going to give me 50.4 inches. So we do have a decimal. We don't have to round. So we have 50.4. And also I said inches, but technically, since we're talking volume, this is cubic inches. So make sure you put inch with a power of 3 because volume is measured in cubics. So we have that going on. Now, the surface area looks a little more complicated. So we have 2, and then we just substitute length times width in. So that's 6 times 4. I'm going to use dots here. Plus then the width and the height, 4 times 2.1. So make a big fat dot, 2.1. Make sure I could tell that's multiplication. Plus then length times height is 6 times 2.1. So again, I can just put this straight into my calculator. So I have 2 in parentheses 6 times 4 plus then 4 times 2.1 plus then 6 times 2.1. Then close my parenthesis and hit enter, and it should give me an answer of 90. So how you want to do that is going to be up to you. You can do it in smaller pieces if you want, but in the end, our surface area is going to be 90, but 90 what? Remember, surface area is how many, in this case, square inches it takes to cover the surface. So remember, the inside is how much it holds. The surface area is how much like wrapping paper it would take to wrap it. So that's going to be what we call it's going to be our square units, if you will, not cubics, but squares. So here we're going to have square inches. So IN with the power 2 there would be our square inches. That's going to be surface area. So 90 square inches would be its surface area. If I move off to question two says find the volume and then find the surface area of the sphere. use 3.4 as an approximation for pi. So, and also the directions say round to the nearest hundredth. So when 3.4 is involved, usually they round to near center. So this means round two places past the decimal. So we'll talk more about rounding as we get into the problem. So our formula is going to be 4/3 times pi times r squared. But notice that this distance they gave us is not the radius. Remember, the radius goes from the center or the core out to, it touches the sphere itself. So that's actually the radius. So they're misleading us with this 40. That's not a radius, it's a diameter. So the radius would be how much then? So we know that the radius would actually be like half the diameter, if you will. So if I take half of 20, or 1/2 times 40, I should say, half of 40 would give me then this 20. So my radius is actually going to be this 20 feet, if you will. So when I find the volume is going to equal this 4/3 times, then I'm going to use parentheses, and I'm going to replace pi with 3.14, and then r is actually 20, and I'm going to put this in parentheses 20, and I'm going to raise the 3 on the outside of that. So using a calculator, some calculators have a fraction button. So mine is tucked away up here in this F1 area. Or I can just use parentheses to make it easier. So if I go in parentheses, 4 divided by 3, close parenthesis, my calculator understands that to be 4/3. Then in parentheses, if I put this 3.14 in, close parenthesis, and then in parentheses, put a 20, close parenthesis. Usually calculators have this little rooftop key or the caret key. If I do this, what it does is it moves my cursor up in the air a little bit. Notice how it's kind of a raised little cursor. Now it's waiting for an exponent. So if I put a 3 in, I think that looks right. Got to get my little magnifying glass out there. That looks correct. So we have that going on. So 4/3 times pi times the radius, which we had to do a little bit of math on, and then we had a cubic. So if we hit enter, we now get this big, big number here. So the volume is pretty big because they gave us a big radius. So the volume is going to be this 33,493 point. Notice how we have to round it to two decimal places. To round it to two decimal places, though, I got to look at the third decimal place. If the third decimal place is 5 or higher, you round up. If it's under 5, then we round back down to the 3. So since this is a 3, then we just round back down to the 3. We do not raise it up to a 4. So the closest answer then would be 33,493.33. So again, this 3 here would say, hey, this third 3 would say, hey, do I keep the 3 or do I move it up to a 4? If it's 5 or more, we move it up. If it's under 5, in other words, 4 or less, we keep it as it is. So since that the third number is a 3, that would say, hey, just keep the 3 in the second decimal place there. So we have that going on there. Now we remember we have to do the units. So since they're talking feet and we're talking volume, volume is measured in cubics, or in this case, cubic feet. So make sure we put the correct unit of measurement there. To find the surface area of the sphere, how much it takes to cover the outside, our surface area formula is going to be 4 pi r squared. So our surface area S, we got 4, and then times then pi, which is 3.14, and then the radius again was 20, but notice this time we have to square it. So notice how I set my problem up on paper, and then I will then type it into the calculator. So 4, and then in parentheses, I like to put the 3.14. Again, you don't have to use parentheses here. Then I have this in parentheses, this 20, close. Now there is a shortcut. Some calculators have this X2 key. X2 key will actually put a power 2 up there. So notice I have my little power 2. So if I hit enter, that'll give me 5,024. So notice how there is no rounding on the surface area. Isn't that a break? So 5,024. MyLab does not require you to put a comma here. You can just write 5,024 without the comma, but it should accept the comma as well. So point then, there is no point. No need one. You could put point zero, but not necessary. So we have, and then notice how this is going to be in, since we're talking about coverage, this is cubic, or sorry, square feet. Square feet. So area is measured in squares, how many squares it takes to cover it, and volume is how many cubes it can hold. So we have that. Now again, you don't have to use parentheses here. You could just go 4 times 3.14 times 20 power 2. It should understand the order of operations and do the math that way. So notice how you still get the same answer without the parentheses. Okay. And again, you do not have to use the comma here or here in your homework. You could just put 5024 like that. Up here, you could put 33. I'm not 100% sure on this one. 33493.33. For me, when I get to the into the 10,000s place, it's easier for me to read it with a comma than without a comma. This is hard for me to read. A comma helps me to read it. So experiment with the comma if you so desire in your work to see how MyLab likes it or not. So question 3, we get into the surface area and volume of a cone. So notice how, again, we have these formulas. Volume is 1/3 pi r squared h, and the surface area is going to be pi r times the square root of r squared plus h squared plus pi r squared. Now remember, this r squared plus h, the square root of r squared plus h squared was actually the length. So since they didn't give us the length, they did give us, though, the height and the radius. So this here actually represents the slant height, if you will. So we don't have to actually find the slant height because we know the radius and the height. So there is no math really to do here except just substitute in. So for the volume, notice how the volume of a cone is actually 1/3 of a cylinder. So it's 1/3, and then we have this 3.14 goes in for pi, and then we have a radius. Notice that the radius goes from the center of the base circle out to the edge of the circle, or the circle itself, if you will. I keep saying the edge of a circle, but when edge is actually a little ambiguous. So you have to be going to a point on the circle. So we do know the radius, but it's got to be squared. And then we got to multiply by the height. And remember, the height is the distance from the apex down to the base of the circle. So this top vertex point is called the apex, and it goes all the way down to the point on the bottom of the base, if you will. So that was 5 inches, if you will. So when I put this in my calculator, I can put in parentheses the 1 divided by 3, close parentheses. And it's a good idea to do that with fractions, is put them in parentheses. The rest of it, you really don't need the parentheses. You can just simply say times then 3.14 times then 4 squared times then 5. And if I hit enter, again, we have to round to the nearest hundredth, so it's 2 decimal places. So I have 83.733. So this third decimal tells me how to round the second decimal, which is the hundredths place. So remember, this 3 here is in the ones place. This is the tens place, 83. Then we get into the tenths place, hundredths place, thousandths place. So if I want to round to the hundredths place, I got to look at the thousandths place number, 3 places out. And notice how, again, that's a 3, so that means we just keep this 3. So our final answer is about then 83.73. But since we're talking about volume, this is going to be cubic inches. So inches cubed for that. So surface area the formula is a lot more involved. So the surface area is going to be pi is 3.14. And again, I'm going to use parentheses here, 3.14. The radius again was the distance from the center of the base of the circle out to the circle itself. So times 4. I'm going to put that in parentheses. And then I'm going to put this whole thing in parentheses. So in parentheses, I'm going to have the square root of r squared. So it's going to be 4 squared plus then h squared, which is 5 squared. And then plus then, again in parentheses, I'm going to have this 3.14 times r squared, which is 4 again. Okay. Again, you don't have to use parentheses for multiplication. So again, I like to type the formulas in all at once. So you can practice on how it works for you. You could do it in pieces. 3.14 times 4 times then the square root of 4 squared. Oops, that didn't work. Got backspace a little bit. Hit the delete button is up here. See if it'll make it go away. All right. So I got to type in my 4 squared plus 5 squared. Now, if you don't want to do the whole thing, you can just hit enter here, and that's going to be the area of the lateral face, if you will. If I want to now do pi r squared, so if I want to do 3.14 plus 4 squared, I'm sorry, times 4 squared, that'll give me the area of the base. So if I want to, I can go up here and highlight this, copy that in, and then plus, and go up here and highlight that, hit enter, and copy that in, and I can add them together and get the answer that way. Okay, so you put it all in, or you can do it in pieces, and then you can copy and paste them. Now I'm using the TI-84 graphing calculator, so it has some power to it that can make the math work out a little bit better. So explore around with your calculator, and if you need some help with your calculator, the Teaching Learning Center is a great place. So my surface area in the end is going to be this 130 point. Again, I got it around to 2 places. So if I go 3 places here, 663, we keep getting these threes. So we're getting the same thing. So notice how this 3 would just say keep the hundreds place to a 6. So this would be 130.66. Now remember, surface area is going to be in square inches. So square inches, we have to put an I in with the power 2. So that's how much material it takes to cover the cone. So the cone holds 83, about 83 cubes, if you will. So I can't read my handwriting there. 83.73. There you go. That's a little bit neater there. So make sure you round to the correct decimal place, otherwise my lab will mark it wrong. So learn from mistakes there. So one last example. Here they give us the volume. So it's like, well, what do we got to do here? Well, what they want us to do is find X. Well, remember, volume is a formula. So notice that volume is equal to, and again, since we have a box, it's the length times the width times the height. If I want to reverse it, I could say the length times the width times the height is equal to the volume. So if I have equal things, the sides of the equations can swap. So since I'm solving for X, I like to have my unknown on this side. So notice how I usually call this the length, this is the width, and this is the height. So if I substitute in, the 11 is going to go in for the length, the 13 is going to go in for the width, and X is going to go in for the height. And then the volume itself was given to us as 786.5. So what the rest is solve for X. So that's how we have to simplify this left side. So I need to know what 11 times 13 is. So 11 times 13 is going to give me 143. So this is going to be 143x is equal to 786.5. Now remember to solve for x, we got to make the coefficient of x turn into 1. So since this is multiplication, if we divide this side by 143, that's going to make the coefficient of x 1. But to keep the equation balanced, I have to divide this side by 143. So therefore, x equals, so if I type in then 786.5, if I now divide that by 143, it's going to give me then 5.5. So x is going to equal 5.5. It looks like this example, we don't have to worry about measurements because they didn't give us any. So we don't have to worry about the measurements there. So hopefully that helped you get you moving into your homework practice.